Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. On August 5th, it was a hot, sunny afternoon. I just finished my summer classes and was on my way home. I tucked my feet into the same comfortable steel toe clips, and unlike most days, I forgot to put on my bike helmet. I had a 12-mile ride in front of me. Long-distance cycling was my strength, and I made it a point to wear a helmet on most days. But for some reason, I forgot about it. I was almost 2 blocks away, riding down a hill on a 4-lane road. I was in the emergency lane on the side of the road because there were no sidewalks. I wasn't concerned. I didn't realize that was a problem until it was too late. About 6 inches from my back tire, I noticed the metal bumper. I have no recollection of anything until I hit the ground. At 3 p.m., I was apparently hit by a drunk driver. He wasn't just tipsy. He had arrived at .52. That's more than 5 times the legal limit. 3 police cars were tailing him. They claimed they saw me and waited until he passed before turning on their lights, fearing that he would swerve to the right to get off the road in response to their signals. However, this driver swerved to the right and hit me anyways. He then attempted to flee. According to witnesses, I almost went under the front right tire of the truck, but I managed to pull myself off the speeding vehicle. I hit the ground 300 feet away with such force that my clothes ripped off my body. I don't remember this, but I later saw those clothes, which were bloody and torn up. I was unable to move as I lay face down on the ground. A police officer on the scene attempted to converse with me in order to keep me awake. "Where do you call home? Who are your next of kin?" he inquired. My fiancée was my closest relative, I told him. He recognized her surname and inquired whether she was related to a man he knew. I won't name her family in this document. We seemed to be there for quite some time. My salty blood began to pool on the warm pavement. The paramedics arrived. They had trouble getting me on a stretcher. They claimed they couldn't lay me because I had so many fractures in my body. On the radio, I heard them list the injuries. My left femur was fractured 5 times. My right hip was fractured 3 times, and I had massive internal bleeding. That's when I became aware of the fractures and the pain. I screamed in agony and passed out as a result of the pain. I was awakened in Good Samaritan Hospital. I had tubes in my nose and throat. All of these machines were linked to me. My arms had so many lines running through them that they resembled spaghetti. I kept telling myself that I was thirsty, but no one could hear me because I was on the drug, Pavelin. For those who are unfamiliar, Pavelin is used to paralyze your body so that you cannot move. I could only move my eyelids and fingertips. My fiancée was present in the room. I went in and out of consciousness. My fiancée devised a method of communicating with me. She'd go through the alphabet, and whenever she got to the right letter, I'd blink. She'd jot that letter down on a pad. She later informed the nurse that I was thirsty. The nurse told her that I couldn't drink any water because I was thirsty due to internal bleeding and would drown in my own liquid. My fiancée pressed ice chips against my lips. It felt great and helped with the pain, but I had trouble swallowing it because of the tubes, if I recall correctly. 3 days later, the doctor called my fiancée and informed her that I was not expected to survive the night and that she should notify my family of my accident. She had already done so, but they asked her to keep them updated on my condition because they lived so far away. She informed my parents of my condition, and they stated that they would try to arrive that night. She also summoned my pastor and a close friend to pay their respects. "My baby," my mother screamed as she ran into the room. She was apparently specifically instructed to be self-controlled because the staff did not want me to be aware of my condition. But that's when I realized something was wrong. My parents would not have come here if they didn't believe something was seriously wrong. I awoke from my slumber in the early hours of the morning. I couldn't take a breath. There was no one in the room. I tried to alert them by pressing a button on my bed, but my arms couldn't move. I noticed a pool of blood flowing from my chest to the bed, then to the floor. What was going on? I saw the nurses rush in just as I passed out. My body had rejected the respirator tubes. They told me months later. My lungs were 92% filled with pulmonary emboli, according to the doctors. From all the fractures, bone marrow was being trapped in the small capillaries of my lungs. I was told that I was getting the most oxygen possible at the time, and the tubes came up. They said they came into the room because my heart had stopped and triggered an alarm at the nurse's station. They couldn't figure out how I was able to see them after my heart had stopped. This was also a mystery to me. My fiancée prayed outside in the waiting room. She noticed all the commotion and wanted to know what was going on, but no one would tell her. The doctor came out a few minutes later and informed her that I had died. She later told me that she bowed her head and gave me to God to do with as he pleased. When I went under, I was dreaming, but it was real. I'll describe how death feels. It's like holding your breath for too long underwater. You claw your way to the surface, gasping for air. The difference is that in death, your body does not move as your mind commands. You mentally scream for help, but your lips do not move. The worst part, in my opinion, was the fear. The few moments without oxygen feel interminable. But then you fade out, and it's as if you're falling asleep. I had a dream that I was passing through a large tunnel. It stretched for miles and ended with a misty white light. I didn't want to leave because I felt so at ease. Someone was with me. I wasn't alone. It was dark, but I wasn't scared. We exchanged words. It wasn't through lips or speech. It was more like telepathy. We could understand each other's thoughts and respond spontaneously. A question was posed to me. Are you prepared to die right now? I was unsure. In the waiting room, I could see my fiancée crying. No, I exclaimed right away. She requires my assistance. And then I awoke. According to the doctors, I was clinically dead 3 times while comatose. Clinical death differs from actual death. It occurs when the monitors can no longer detect brain waves or heart activity. Nonetheless, brain waves came and went. I could hear muffled voices the day before I woke up. My fiancée's hand was on mine. On my head, I felt a cool liquid. The next morning, I awoke. A coma is similar to going to bed exhausted and waking up the next morning, wondering how time flew by so quickly. At first, I couldn't believe I'd been gone for so long. I desperately wanted to get out of bed and go home. This story contains a twist. That cool liquid was my pastor anointing my head with oil for my final rites. My fiancée swears I awoke soon after they left. 4 people were present. It startled some of the staff and frightened my roommate, whom I had the pleasure of meeting later on. My room was being cleaned up by the nurse. She noticed my brainwaves resuming. She requested assistance. The staff revived me this time. They failed the first time because they needed to clear all the blood from my lungs first and were unable to help me until now, but they were successful this time in getting me to breathe again. More tubes were inserted and gauze were sewn into my arms. An arterial line was placed on my left wrist. A tube on my right hand formed a circuit in which blood was oxygenated outside of my lungs by passing through a machine. My fiancée was told by the doctor not to expect me to wake up because I'd been deprived of oxygen for a long time. My fiancée sat by my bedside, praying and waiting, day after day. My body was stiff, she said, and my eyes were fixed on the ceiling. I was unconscious for 22 days. I was wheeled down to the floor after I awoke to undergo some tests and an ultrasound. Ultrasound is a technique in which a probe is used to create a picture inside your body using vibrations. My fractures had not yet been set, I discovered. The staff was afraid that if they attempted surgery while I was unconscious, I would die. My fiancé informed me that my surgery had failed after I'd gone into surgery. My femur was so badly fractured that the pins wouldn't stay in place. They planned to try a new technique and fly in a team of surgeons to see if they could fix it. If not, they promised to take the leg. My second surgery went well. The doctors inserted a rod through the center of my femur from hip to knee. To keep the pieces together, they wrapped a coil around the femur. The rod was barbed on both ends to ensure a firm grip on my joints. However, it severely restricted my range of motion. I was still not out of the woods. While I was lying in bed watching the blood splatter, they gave me a local and drilled a bit through both legs. I couldn't feel the pain, but the vibrations of the bit passing through made me sick. They then inserted a metal pin through each leg, which protruded about ½ inch from each side. They applied iodine and some kind of jelly to the ends. For the next 8 weeks, they connected cables to the rods and suspended my legs in traction. I can't describe the agony I felt during the time. For the first few weeks, I was on Demerol, morphine, and Valium. I was in a fantasy land. For pain, I was given a shot every other hour. Around noon, the physical pain began. The sheets had to be changed every day. While others changed the sheets, about 8 people lifted me up. I screamed 10 times loud enough to be heard down the hall. Then there's the emotional humiliation. I could no longer urinate in private. I couldn't take a breather without someone on staff taking a sample to be tested in a lab somewhere. Someone had to help me clean up. I was humiliated and embarrassed. But what could I possibly do? One day, someone entered the room and began preaching from Psalms about how God was punishing me by breaking both of my legs. He showed me a verse about a fool drawing near the gates of death and having his legs broken for some reason. For weeks, I lied on my back, wondering if God was mad at me for sleeping with my fiancée before we married. If God was behind all of this, surely he could have gotten my attention in another way. I thought about it for a long time. What else could I do for the next 2 months while lying in bed staring up at the ceiling with a respirator down my throat? I was in the ICU for 4.5 months in total. I was so stiff by the time I lost traction that I couldn't move. Just bending my arms and legs took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of coughing up bone marrow from my lungs. During my stay at Good Samaritan Hospital, I received over 200 heparin injections in my stomach, not to mention numerous transfusions. Through the IV line, I received 66 units of blood. I was finally released from the hospital in the winter of 1984. My fiancé took me to McDonald's, where I had a Big Mac attack. The staff apparently never thought to check for internal bleeding before releasing me. The burger caused a reaction that nearly killed me. I'm in a different hospital the next thing you know. For the next 30 days, you'll be in intensive care. Then came more reconstructive surgery and even more agony. I was in and out of hospitals for 3 years. The amount of time allowed me to gain a thorough understanding of those in wheelchairs. During those 3 years, I frequently sobbed while sitting in a wheelchair and staring up at the familiar steps to my apartment, unable to step up them without help. I wondered if I'd ever be able to walk again. Would I need a cane? Was I ever going to be able to run or ride my 10-speed again? And, as I write this, I can tell you that the majority of those questions have no answer. On a daily basis, I now deal with arthritis, bursitis in both hips, and heel spurs in both feet. I've been told that as I get older, my condition will deteriorate. That wheelchair will someday guide me into the next life. The drunk driver had 5 prior convictions. He was charged with 4 felonies and 4 misdemeanors. He was imprisoned for 10 days and was in and out of jail long before I awoke from the medications I was on in the ICU. After murdering an 8-year-old girl 2 years before, one would think he learned his lesson. I was more upset with the judge than with this sentence. My fiancée was present at the hearing. She only asked for one thing. She wanted to see what he did. His attorney claimed that seeing me was a violation of his constitutional rights. The judge concurred. According to what I was told, all 4 felonies were dropped because he was too intoxicated to be conscious of his actions. I was bitter for years. I shook my fist at God and cursed him for putting me through this ordeal. I wished to murder the drunk driver, but I couldn't see myself spending the rest of my life in prison to exact vengeance on what he had gotten away with. Others had even offered to take him in, but I knew that even if I killed him, I'd have to answer for my actions one day. He'll have to do accounting one day. It was simply not my place to do so.